All right, welcome. Today we're doing something a little different. Think of it as a forensic investigation. But we're not looking at a crime scene, we're auditing the source code of reality itself. And the goal? It's to decode how we understand the divine, not as some big mystery we just have to accept, but as a system that we can actually understand. Our investigation starts right now. For the longest time, we've been told we have to pick a side. Either the universe is just a chaotic, random accident, or faith is this mystical secret wrapped in fog that just demands belief without any kind of proof. This explainer is here to challenge that whole idea. What if the truth isn't a secret at all, but a signal, just hiding in plain sight? What if the creator operates on a coherent, logical system that we're actually built to decode? Okay, so to get this audit done, we've got a clear 5-step plan. We're going to start with the main problem, then introduce a totally new way of analyzing it, apply that to the data, define your role in all of this, and finally land on a completely new kind of conclusion. So let's kick off this investigation with the biggest bug in the system. And that bug is actually in our own thinking. It's what I'd call a crisis of projection. We have this deep-seated habit of seeing ourselves everywhere we look. And this bug, it has a name, anthropomorphism. It's basically our brain's default setting. We project human qualities onto everything, especially the divine. Now, it makes the infinite feel a bit more familiar, sure, but it comes with a huge cost. It's kind of like we're holding up a mirror to the universe, a mirror shaped exactly like us, and then we mistake that reflection for the real thing. And this projection, this way of thinking, it really splits down two very different roads. On one side, you've got the super literal take, the idea that God actually has a physical body, sits on a throne, or can be captured in an idol. But on the other side, you've got the symbolic path, understanding a phrase like hand of God as a metaphor for divine power. These are two completely different ways of processing the exact same information. There was this philosopher, Ludwig Feuerbach, who basically said, hey, this is no accident. His whole point was that when we talk about God, what we're really talking about is just the best version of ourselves, projected outward. We take our own highest ideals, put them on this divine canvas, and then we turn around and worship our own reflection. This is the big intellectual challenge we have to get past. Okay, so how do we get past this? How do we stop looking in that human-shaped mirror? Well, we need a new framework. We have to make a shift, moving away from subjective feelings and into objective verification. And here's where we make a huge pivot. Let's start thinking about our own minds differently. Your mind isn't the source creating the signal. It's more like a highly sophisticated receiver, one that was designed and calibrated to pick up on a signal that's already out there. Our job isn't to invent the signal, it's to interpret it correctly. So the big question is, how do you calibrate this receiver? Well, the calibration key comes from this foundational principle in the Quran. There is nothing like unto him. Think about that. It's an absolute rule of transcendence. It means whatever you can possibly think of, whatever you can imagine, he is not that. This one principle is the failsafe that stops us from creating God in our own image. Okay, so once our receiver is calibrated, we've got two new tools we can start using. First, there's Fitra. Think of this as your internal architecture, the pre-installed logic that helps you recognize truth and coherence when you see it. And second, there's ayat. These are the data points themselves, the signs, the patterns, the systemic signatures that are embedded all throughout reality, which your Fitra is designed to pick up on. All right, let's see how these tools actually work together in a real system. We're going to use an analogy from the world of computing, the information feed. Just think about it like this. Reality is constantly streaming raw data at us, just a constant feed. But without the right key to decode it, it's all just noise. So let's take a look at some of this raw data. In source texts like the Quran, you find terms like God's hand, face, and eyes. Now, if you process that information through the default filter of your own human experience, it sounds incredibly literal, right? It almost seems to confirm that physical, anthropomorphic view we talked about earlier. But here's where we bring in our key, the metadata. We apply that foundational rule from Quran 42:11. There is nothing like unto him. This is the instruction manual. This is the key that tells us how to properly interpret that feed of raw data, and it stops us from making a really catastrophic mistake. And what happens when you do that? Well, you get a perfect picture of the system in action. When you run the raw data through the filter of the metadata, all that noise suddenly becomes a coherent signal, God's hand isn't a literal hand. It's a powerful symbol of divine power and generosity. God's face isn't a physical feature. It symbolizes his very presence and essence. And God's eyes aren't organs. They represent his total awareness and constant care. See, the system just works. What looked like a huge contradiction suddenly becomes this incredibly profound and coherent message. Okay, so this is all great in theory, but what does it actually mean for you? Because this isn't just some abstract exercise. This whole system gives you a very specific and a very active role. You're not just a passive believer here. You are a system administrator. Well, in this framework, a concept like shirk, which is often translated as idolatry, gets a total redefinition. It's a system error. It's a kind of intellectual dishonesty. It's what happens when you fail to run the system according to its own blueprint. It's the error of taking something that is infinite and trying to cram it into a finite, created little box. So what's your job as the system admin, as the trustee? It's really a simple 3-step protocol. First, you have to acknowledge the blueprint. Always uphold that core principle of absolute transcendence. Second, interpret the data correctly. Understand these attributes as powerful metaphors, not literal facts. And third, actively avoid system errors by rejecting any and all attempts to give the divine a physical, literal form. And this is the bottom line, really. Your faith isn't meant to be a passive, blind acceptance of something you're told. It is your active, rational competence in managing this divine system of meaning. It's all about intellectual integrity. And that brings us to our final conclusion. This entire audit, this whole process, it leads to a pretty radical shift in how we see things. One that puts your own reason, your own ability to verify right at the center of it all. Just look at the difference here. It's night and day. The old paradigm was all about a leap of faith, right? A jump into the unknown, believing without seeing any evidence. The new paradigm we've just audited, it's about taking a step of certainty into the light. It's about verifying a system that makes sense, drawing a conclusion from the evidence, and seeing reality not as some mystical secret, but as a radiant, logical, coherent whole. So this all leads to a powerful final thought. The command here is not to just blindly submit to something you can't rationally process. Your intellect, your reason, it's not the enemy of faith. It's the primary tool of faith. So here it is. Here's your mandate as we wrap this up. Your task is to verify the system for yourself. Run the data through the metadata, see the coherence with your own eyes. And once you have, assume your role. Assume your role as its trustee, as its administrator, and that, right there, isn't just about belief. It's about taking on a profound intellectual and spiritual responsibility.